Hi, everybody. Welcome. Can you hear me? Hello, Efigênia from São Paulo. Camis from Egypt. Great. Oh, thank you, Camis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it also cold where you're speaking from? Here in São Paulo, it's still pretty cold. Let's see. Yasmin from São Paulo as well. Welcome, Yasmin. Alison from Salvador. That's great. Luis from Bogotá. Hello, Teresa. Welcome. Milagros from Peru. Wow, that's great. Ana from Curitiba. Hello, everyone. Maria de Rosario from Mexico. Ana is also from São Paulo. And Ana Feitosa is saying that it's very cold here in Rio Grande do Sul. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Ana. I don't know about you, but I'm not really a fan of cold weather. So it's been tough, to say the least. Rosemary from São Paulo, Fernanda is from Porto Alegre. Very nice. We have people from all over Brazil, others from different countries as well. All right, Ana Valéria, great. So, thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. My name is Lygia, and I'm an academic consultant at Troika. Have you ever heard of Troika, by the way? If you haven't, we're a consulting company which specializes in a lot of services related to education. And we're also a community of teachers who are always seeking continuing professional development. So, if you want to find out more about Troika, all you have to do is click on the button above. So, you'll be able to check out our website. And as I was saying, I'm very happy to be here today talking about writing effective ELT materials. This is a topic I'm quite interested in, and thank you, Disal, for the opportunity. And just a heads up, what we have in store today is the following. We'll start by defining what materials are, then we'll move on and discuss some features of effective ELT materials. And along the way, we'll also talk about some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. And as usual, if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. I'll be looking at the chat box throughout the presentation, so please feel free to interrupt me and ask away. All right. There are more people saying hello here in the chat box. A lot of people said that they already know Troika. Great. All right. So let's get started. As I've already mentioned before, we'll start by defining what materials are. So I'd like to hear from you now. When you think about materials, can you think of any examples of materials? What are we talking about when we say materials? Any examples? Any definitions that come to mind? Please tell me your ideas in the chat box, okay? So Noeli is saying tools. Flavia, resources. Teresa agrees. So what examples of resources everyone. Authentic material, Victor. Printed resources. Larissa is saying textbooks, exercises. So here we have some very concrete examples. Do you agree with Larissa? Are these examples of materials? Ana Valeria is saying, I use books and make my own material. Great, Ana Valeria. Hi, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Aisi from Turkey. I'm sorry. I think I mispronounced it. Authentic or not? We'll talk about authenticity throughout the webinar, Thais. Ana de Preto is saying essays. All right. Well, let me show you some examples of materials here on the slide. And as you can see, materials range from progress tests to worksheets to answer keys, reading texts, flashcards, everything that we produce and that is used in the classroom or that is used by teachers outside the classroom. Materials can be classified in different ways, actually. Some of them are meant to be used only by students outside the classroom when they're studying by themselves. So these are called self-study materials, right? There are also materials which we use in the classroom with our learners. So both teachers and students use these materials, such as the course book. So these are in-class materials. And there are also materials which are meant to be used only by the teacher, such as the teacher's book, right? And they also serve different purposes, right? Let me ask you another question now. Which of these have you already written, or which of these do you usually write? I know that worksheets are quite popular at some schools and language institutes. A lot of teachers write worksheets and they share the worksheets with each other. So it's quite common. But what about your context? Please tell me a little bit more. Or is there anything that you would like to write in the future, that you would like to give it a try? So Allison is saying in class and self-study are those I produce the most. All right, Allison, thank you. Any examples of in class and self-study materials that you usually write? Noeli is saying essays. All right. Fernanda is mentioning here, is saying the teacher's book. All right. I prepare conversation classes based on real material, articles, tweets. All right. So you use authentic material in your classes, Carolina. Great. Anything else that you usually write for your lessons or that you sometimes need to write? For instance, some teachers use a course book, but they like to complement it sometimes. Milagros is saying articles. Alison is saying essays, short text, pieces of news, gap fills help a lot. Anna, we'll talk about gap fills in our webinar today. TED Talks as well. All right, great. So now that we've mentioned some examples of materials and how they can be classified, let's think about materials that we enjoy using in our lessons. And based on that, let's think about this question here. What are the features of effective materials? So why do you think that these materials that you enjoy using with your learners, or materials that your students seem to like, why do you think they work? Think about this question for a moment. And when you're ready, please tell me your thoughts in the chat box. Why do you like using specific materials, teaching with specific materials in your lessons as opposed to others? So Luis has mentioned instructions. So clear instructions are a feature of effective materials. Interesting. Luis, we'll talk about instructions today as well. Fernanda is saying that topics or content which is up to date is also important. Carolina has mentioned personalization. Interesting. Adilia, they have to be authentic. Teresa is also talking about authenticity here. They contain authentic language, all right? So maybe this is a feature of effective materials. They help language acquisition, they promote learning. Songs. All right, so materials with songs are useful. Great. Clear objectives. Lots of interesting ideas here, everyone. Thank you so much for your contributions. We'll mention some of them today. Some we won't have time to delve into today, but at the end of the session, I'll share you my contact. I'll share with you my contact information so that you can get in touch with me and talk about some aspects that we might not have time for today. Great. Well, I'll show you two features right now, but please feel free to share some other ideas in the chat box if you haven't done so yet. No problem. So, well, the first two features that I'd like to highlight today are relevance and motivation. And I believe that some of you have mentioned these two characteristics, these two elements in the chat box as well. So, yes, it may seem obvious, but it's worth emphasizing that topics and contexts in our materials need to be relevant to our students' needs and expectations. Yes, they also need to be up to date, as one of you has mentioned as well, so that they motivate students. So, if you are writing a controlled practice activity, for instance, and the target language is going to, well, you can write a dialogue with two characters, for instance, talking about what they want to do in the future, their future careers, their plans for their careers. And this might be very relevant to older teenagers who are still thinking about the career they want to pursue in their lives. But if your students are older students, if they're adults who have already decided what they want to do in life, this type of activity might not be so relevant and therefore not so motivating to them. So, this is why it's paramount to know who our students are, to know who our target students are, so that everything that we write is relevant, engaging, interesting, and motivating to our students. So, it's always worth keeping that in mind. And meaningful. Yes, Viviane, this is it. And well, what else do we need to bear in mind when we're thinking about effective materials? Yes, authenticity. A lot of you, I think, have mentioned authenticity, and this is an important feature as well. Effective materials usually look authentic, or at least they have a feel of authenticity. And how can this be achieved? Well, through pictures, through photographs, by the way different texts are designed. All of this is related to authenticity. So if we look at this picture, which is featured in the textbook Life by National Geographic, we can see how authentic it is because it's something that we might easily see on Google Maps, for instance. I'm sorry, and not only is it attractive to the reader, but it's also something very relevant because we know that students oftentimes use apps such as Google Maps on their phone. So this is something that they might have to look at outside the classroom. So this this is a feature which is related to authenticity and that we can clearly see in this course book. Now, when it comes to choosing pictures for our materials, there are some websites that we can choose from. And I'd like to show you some of my favorite ones right now. Some of them you might be familiar with, others not. So let me change the window that I'm sharing with you right now. Let me see. All right. You can see my browser right now. So the first website I'd like to talk about today is Unsplash. I don't know if you've heard of it, but this is one of my favorite ones. Yes, some people say that it's too popular nowadays because we can see its images in lots of presentations by different professionals worldwide. But there's no denying it. The pictures are beautiful overall. Some of them are quite artistic as well. And they're also free. So, this is a website that you can use when you're looking for images for your materials. Another one, also very popular, is called Pixabay. We can see it here. So some of the photos that you may find here are similar to what you might find on Unsplash. There are some other resources as well, for instance, illustrations. You can also take a look at some of them here. So if you're working with younger learners, you might want to choose some illustrations for your materials. There are also some vectors here, these images with bold colors, which are created based on lines and circles and etc. They might be useful as well. This is also free, by the way. Another one which I like is Free Pick. A highlight on this website are the vectors. So this is something I've done many times. For instance, there was a project in which I was involved, and we had to teach some scientific concepts to students in English. So if you type in opposite adjectives, for instance, or the adjectives or the concepts you have in mind, you can find these vectors here, which show the two adjectives or the concepts that you want to present to your learners. And once again, this is also a free website. Of course, there are some pictures, some vectors which aren't free, but a lot of options are free of charge. So I've used these images here more than once, and they can be quite useful if you're teaching science or geography, math to your students in English. Now, if you want to use more diverse images in your materials, you can consider this website here. It's called Black Illustrations. And let's take a look at an example here. Let's choose a famous category, business, for instance. You'll find these icons with Black people that you can include in your materials. Some of these are free, as we can see, others are not, but lots of interesting illustrations that you can use with your learners. So this is an option that you can consider. And there's this other one, which I've come across quite recently, actually. It's this Brazilian website here. It's called Tem Que Ter. And, well, if you type in amigos, for instance, you'll see all of these images showing people from the LGBTQIA plus community. So this is something that we don't usually find on other websites, and they're also free. Mind you, please pay attention to the rules of each website. It might be necessary to credit the pictures that you use in your material. So it's always important to have a look at the regulations of each website. But there are others as well. You can explore other possibilities online, but these are some possibilities that you can already consider in the future. Let me go back to my presentation right now. One moment. And I'll also have a look at the chat box. Let's see if I've missed anything. Oh, the same image in impact. Oh, yeah, this might happen, right, Adriana? Okay, you're welcome, Teresa. Let me see if I've missed any questions as well. Okay, great. So, as we were saying before, by using images which look authentic, such as some of the photographs and the images that we've seen, our students will probably find our materials much more engaging and motivating, right? So moving on now, let's take a look at another important feature, which is ease of use. So our materials need to be easy to follow. So they need to be easy both for the students who are using the materials and also for the teachers who might use our materials as well. Now, how can we make our materials easy to follow? Well, Titles are very useful. So we can include titles, headings, subheadings in our materials because, well, they help students memorize what an activity or what a sequence of activities was about. It's an easy reference for students. And they also help other teachers understand the purpose of our activities as well. If you are creating a worksheet, for instance, something you could consider is including a title for the entire worksheet, and this title should be something very general overall. For instance, family or free time activities, and also some headings or subheadings for the different sections on our worksheet so that we break up the activities into more manageable sections. And these headings can be something along these lines of vocabulary, listening, grammar, very useful for everyone, and they make our materials much easier to follow. Now, what else? Navigation. So, materials need to be easy to navigate. How can we do that? Well, something important, something that is, I'd say, easy enough to remember, is that when we are writing a series of exercises, we need to number the activities, right? Number one, two, and three. So I'd say that this is easy enough to remember, but a common pitfall, something that I usually find when I'm editing content by other content writers, is that the gaps in a gap fill activity, for instance, aren't numbered. So they don't have any numbers before them, or there are no letters before each gap, A, B, C. And it's so simple, right? But it's something that we often forget, but it makes a whole difference in the classroom, right? When we're checking answers with our group, also when we're writing the answer key, things are faster, things are clearer if we use these simple notation systems. So don't forget to number the gaps, the questions, what have you, in your activities as well. They make our materials easier to follow as well. Now, something else, and I believe someone in the chat box mentioned that as well, is instructions, right? So I'm just taking a look at the chat box over here. All right. So the instructions in our materials are also quite important because once again, they make them easier to navigate or not. But something for us to consider when we're writing the instructions for our activities is, are the instructions short or long? Do they use simple or complex language? Oftentimes, what I see is long instructions using somewhat complex language or very difficult language sometimes. So, some tips that I can give you are: keep your instructions short, only one action per sentence. So go to page blah, blah, blah. This is one action, so one sentence, and then you stop. Use imperatives as well. So go, open, talk, write. Imperatives are always straightforward, easy to understand, and also no more than three sentences. Let's keep our instructions short. If you need more than three sentences, this probably means that it's time for you to start another activity. So stop this one and start another exercise. And also, as a rule of thumb, giving one example first usually helps, especially in self study materials, because students need to figure out everything by themselves. So, the first one should always be an example as a rule of thumb. So, let's take a look at these instructions right now. What I'd like you to do is first, think about how you could rewrite these instructions following the tips that I've just given you. And when you're ready, please tell me your ideas in the chat box. How could we rewrite these instructions so that they're clearer and easier to understand? When you're ready, share your ideas in the chat box, please. Thais, as for your question here, yes, if we are speaking to our students while giving instructions, yes, if they're long, they elevate our TTT. Yes. So we already have some suggestions here in the chat box. Very nice. Would anybody else like to give it a try? Only few people here, very few people, have contributed their ideas over here. What I can see is that you've used imperatives, the sentences are short. Excellent. All right. Well, let me show you what I had in mind for these instructions. And if you haven't shared your ideas yet, don't worry, you can still do it, okay? But this is something that I had in mind for the previous instructions. So, as some of you have done as well, I've broken up those instructions into two different activities. So, first, working pairs, write two questions, and then in number two, join a different pair, ask and answer your question. So, these instructions, as well as your suggestions in the chat box, would be much easier for students to understand, for teachers to understand as well, because they're short, they use imperatives, one action at a time. Some they use the tips that we've talked about before. Yes, Maria, definitely. So, what else? just for us to wrap up this point here, we've already addressed titles, navigation. There's something else that I'd like to bring up today, and it's consistency. Consistent materials are also much easier to follow. And what I mean by that is that we need to be consistent with the fonts that we use, the font size, words in bold, the colors that we choose. All of this needs to be consistent throughout. Now, what we usually do is, for instance, the instructions. The instructions to activities are usually in bold when we write materials. So this is something you could consider as well. Also, I'd say avoid serif fonts such as Times New Roman, those fonts that have small lines at the end of each letter. These fonts, serif fonts, might be difficult for some students to read. Also, italics. This is something I'd say, oh, avoid italics because dyslexic students might find italics difficult to read. Also, if you are preparing slides for your lesson, if you're teaching online, what is the minimum font size for everyone to be able to read the text on your slides? Well, 32 is the minimum for text on slides. Now, if you are preparing something to be read, to be printed later on, 12 is the minimum font size, okay, on page. Now, if all of these details are a problem for you, all paying attention to detail, if this is a problem for you, what I can suggest is, well, proofread your material more than once if possible. If you try to proofread your material only once and pay attention to everything at the same time, chances are you'll miss some things now and then. Now, if you proofread your material more than once and with a different focus each time, you'll probably be able to find possible mistakes and correct them. So you finish writing a worksheet, you can go back to the beginning and then only pay attention to the words in bold. Check if you're being consistent. Once you've done that, you can go back to the beginning and check, for instance, the spacing in the activities, for instance. And then you follow the same procedure for different things or different details that you might struggle with. So this is something that works very well, at least in my case, and this is something that I'd recommend as well. Let me take a look at the chat box one more time. Let me see if I've missed something. We also have some other examples of instructions. Noeli is saying it depends on the group. I'm not sure what you're referring to here, Noeli. Would you mind giving me more information about your comment here? Renata is saying font shape and size are, yes, definitely much more important than people think. The best font for the activity. All right, Carolina. You download different fonts sometimes. That's great. Okay, Arial 12. Is this a good font? I always do that. You know, I'll be honest with you, Renata. I haven't used Arial in quite some time. So let me take a look at it here. Are you thinking about something to be printed, by the way? Or are you thinking about a presentation on PowerPoint? What do you have in mind? Please tell me, Renata. So let me take a look here. Yes, this is very, what did Paulo say? Very basic, but it works. It works for me as well. Okay, this is a serif font, as I can see here, but overall, it's not the same as other serif fonts that I have seen. So it looks okay to me, Renata. It works well in print. Okay, great. You always proofread your own material. Great, Renata. Yes. So, all right. I believe we can move on. There's still a couple of features that I'd like to address. Let me change the slide here. Well, actually, it's one feature, but I'll also break it down so that we can focus on different aspects of variety. So, yes, effective materials have a wide range of activities, and the activities are not only the same type of activity. So, we need to consider exercise design when we think about variety. So, if you only design gap fills for your materials, it'll be a bit repetitive, not as engaging as different types of exercises, and also you won't be catering to different learning preferences in your material. So it's important to write different types of exercises so that there's variety in our materials. And also, when it comes to exercise design, it's essential to think about how achievable our activities are. So, what we need to ask ourselves is, will students be able to do this activity? So put yourself in student shoes, considering their age, considering their level. Is this too difficult for my students, or is it too easy? Maybe the opposite. So let's take a look at an example now. Take a look at this activity. You don't even need to worry about the details here. But tell me, do you think that this activity is achievable? Yes or no, and why? I'm interested in your reasons as well. Why is this achievable, or why isn't it achievable? Any thoughts, everyone? Yes, Ana Valéria, getting feedback can also help us when it comes to finding mistakes in our materials, right? Great. So there's a bunch of black spaces. Uh, do you mean the gaps, Allison? So this is a gap fill, right? So students should listen and then write the answers at the same time. They're supposed to listen to the recording and fill in all these gaps at the same time. Would students be able to do this? What do you think? Let me see some other answers. There are too many blanks, Ana Valeria is saying. It's too open. There should be more guidance. It's confusing. It depends on the student's level. Are too close to each other could be quite challenging. Yes, Marcia. Marcia Keiko. Are you the Marcia Keiko that I know, Marcia? I know a Marcia Keiko. Maybe you're somebody that I know. The teacher would focus on a specific piece of vocabulary. All right, but this is pretty much it, Marcia. The gaps are too close to each other. In the first line, we have 4 gaps here. Then in the second, another 4. There are just too many gaps and they're too close to each other. So it would be virtually impossible for students, and regardless of their level, to listen and write everything at the same time. Let me take a look at the questions that I've missed as well. Okay, I believe. All right, I haven't actually missed any questions. So this is it. This type of activity, this activity wouldn't be achievable because students wouldn't be able to listen and write all of these answers at the same time. And this is a common pitfall, everybody. Something else, another common pitfall in this type of activity. Have you noticed that the answer to the first question here is in the first line? The question is, where does he want to go? And the first line says, excuse me, blah, 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 a shopping center. This is the answer to exercise 2. It wouldn't be even necessary for students to listen to the audio to find the correct answer. Something else, have you also noticed that the gaps aren't numbered? There aren't numbered, there aren't any letters before each one. So checking the answers to this activity might be a bit difficult in the classroom. So you may ask me, okay, but what is an ideal number of gaps then when I'm devising a controlled activity or a listening for a specific activity such as this one? Is there an ideal number of gaps? Yes. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's something called the rule of 8. So ideally, controlled practice activities or listening or reading for specific information activities such as this one should have 8 gaps or 8 questions. Of course, yes, this may vary according to students' level, according to, well, according to their course as well, for according to the type of material actually. So for instance, self-study materials usually have more gaps because this is something that students usually expect from self-study materials, lots of practice opportunities and longer exercises as well. But 8 is a good number overall, so we can keep this number in mind when we write controlled practice activities, as I've mentioned, or reading or listening for specific activities. So we've talked about exercise design. What else? Flow. We also need to think about the flow of our activities. And, well, how can we achieve a good flow in our materials, in our lessons? Well, something that helps is the heads up, heads down test. And I don't know if you've heard of this before, but what does it entail? Well, when we're preparing our materials, we need to think about how they will work in the classroom. So when will students be looking down at their books, at their materials, and when will students be looking up, looking around the classroom, looking at their classmates? Students need these moments, right? They need to be able to look up and around the classroom and at their classmates as well. So something that helps is trying to strike a balance between heads down moments when students are looking down at their materials, at their course books, for instance, and moments when students are looking up at you, at their classmates, and etc. So, as I've mentioned, try to strike a balance between these two moments. And something else is that, well, when you're writing a worksheet, for instance, or when you're planning your lesson, the first activity is usually a heads up activity. And why? Because this allows students to talk to their classmates, to get engaged in the topic of the lesson. So the first activity on a worksheet in a course book, for instance, you may notice that it's usually a heads up activity. So as I've mentioned, this is something that you can consider so that your materials achieve a good flow. Let me take a look at the chat box one more time. We're at the end of the presentation already. Okay, one moment. Too many gaps. Oh, yes. Oh, Marcia. Great to see you here, dear. More like a guessing game other than a gap filling exercise. Well, it wouldn't be actually a guessing game, Teresa, because they would listen to the recording, okay? Uh, Rule of eight, Allison. Eight, the number. Rule of eight, okay? Renata has also mentioned the number of gaps. Oh, that's great, Allison. All right. So let's just talk about something else before we wrap up. I'd also like to mention personalization here, right? So this is something that some of you have mentioned before as well. So, yes, students need opportunities to relate to the material, to use the target language in a more personalized way, in a more meaningful way. So, a rule of thumb for a worksheet, if you're writing a worksheet, is at least 2 moments of personalization. So, at least 2 moments for students to use the vocabulary, to use the grammar item in a more personalized way, in a freer way, right? And something else that I'd like to mention is that, well, the less activity on a worksheet or in a lesson, in a course book, for instance, is usually something more personalized. And why? Because this way we can check at the end of the lesson what our students have learned, what they still need to work on. So this is very important information for us teachers as well. So try to keep that in mind as well. The less activity on a worksheet, in a lesson, try to make it more personalized so that we can we can assess our students' progress and also uh, see what needs to be worked on in the future. And it's usually a heads up activity as well, right? It usually involves some speaking. So let me see, it's 4:52 right now. Let's do something very fast right now. I'd like to show you a spread from the course book Life once again by National Geographic. I'd like to I'd like you to take a look at it and see if you can identify some of the features we've talked about today. Uh, you don't need to pay much attention to all the details here. Let me zoom in a little bit just so it's easier for you to read everything. But just by having an overall look at this lesson here, can you find any of the elements that we've talked about today? Let me see. Maya, the rule of eight is something that we usually consider when we're talking about controlled practice activities. So, an activity involving grammar or vocabulary where there's only one correct answer, okay? Or, for instance, when students read a text and focus on specific information, or listen to something and focus on specific information, all right? Um, so we usually consider this number, okay, an ideal number for these types of activities, okay? To cover the entire text from the beginning to the end. Thais, I'm not sure I understand your question. If we're talking about a reading for specific or listening for specific activity, yes, we usually try to get students to focus on information which appears at the beginning of the listening text or of the reading text and at the end of the text as well. Okay. So Isabel is saying short instructions. Yes, we can see short instructions here. Complete number 2, for instance. Complete the table with these words, and this is it. Yes, Thais, a reading text or a listening text. This is it. Authenticity. Yeah, so look at the image that we have here. This is probably a real person, Jack Gazoko. This person probably exists. So we can see authenticity as well. Number gaps. Ah, yes, in exercise 4, for instance, well, these are in gaps. These are options, but all of them are preceded by letters. So 1A, B, C. It's here as well, right? All of these are preceded by letters. Straightforward instructions, gaps are numbered, clear activities, examples. I don't remember examples here. Do we have examples in the activities? Tell me, please, where did you find examples? I didn't see any examples at the beginning of activities. Authentic photos. Ah, personalization. Yes, Anna. We have lots of opportunities for personalization here. For instance, exercise 11, speaking. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Students get to speak to each other about their plans, lots of opportunities. Also in exercise 10 as well, think about your plans, tell your partner where, when, and why you're going. I believe, let's see, in number 3 as well. So lots of opportunities for personalized practice. Engaging images, titles. Yes, Rosemary, that's right. Nobody had mentioned the titles yet. So look, here we have people in film and the arts, also some headings, vocabulary, reading, listening. So it's very easy to navigate through this material as well. Variety of activities. Very nice, everybody. So I believe we've covered some very important features of effective materials today. Please tell me, do you have any other questions, anything else that you'd like to ask me before we wrap up? We still have 2 minutes. Anything else that you'd like me to mention that you're not sure about? Thank you, Marcia. Thank you so much, everybody. Some more examples as well. Well, if you're still thinking about a question, let me just show everyone the references in the meantime. These are the main references that I've used for this session. So the first one is ETpedia, a book by Lindsay Clanfield and John Hughes. And by the way, John Hughes teaches a wonderful course on materials writing at the university, at the Oxford University. It's a course which is actually offered by a department at the Oxford University, and I believe it's called Writing Your Own ELT Materials or something along these lines. So, fantastic course. I recommend it. And the other one, which you might also be interested in, is Materials Development in Language Teaching by it's edited by Brian Tomlinson. So these are 2 references for you if you want to read more, if you want to know more information about materials writing. these are some references for you. And well, if you'd like to get in touch with me in the future, if you have any questions or if you'd like to talk to me about some of the elements that we've talked about today or something that I haven't mentioned perchance, this is my email. And you can also find me on Instagram, Lee Leite over there with double L. And so please drop me a line. And thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you sometime in the future. Thank you very much. Bye bye.